Hello and welcome. I'm Savri Jindal and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top stories of this hour. US President Donald Trump has suggested some TV networks should have their licenses taken away amid a row over ABC host Jimmy Kimmel. Disney-owned network announced it was suspending Kimmel's show indefinitely following backlash over his comments about the murder of conservative influencer Charlie Kirk. US President Donald Trump announced plans to finalize a deal on TikTok during an upcoming call with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The deal would have TikTok's US operations owned by American investors, including major tech companies. Trump also noted that the app has helped boost his popularity with younger voters, potentially aiding to his 2024 campaign. The US Supreme Court will hear arguments on November 5th over the legality of Donald Trump's sweeping global tariffs. This comes after lower appeals court ruled that Trump overstepped his authority by using emergency powers to impose tariff. The case will test the limits of presidential authority in driving economic policy. The United States vetoed a crucial UN Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza as Israel intensified its offensive. This is the sixth time that the United States has vetoed a resolution on the truce at the UN since the beginning of the war on October 7th. The resolution, supported by 14 of the 15 members, demanded an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, the release of hostages, and increased humanitarian aid. The Israeli army urged the government on Thursday to halt the entry of humanitarian aid from Jordan to Gaza following a shooting attack at the border crossing. Israel's Lieutenant General recommended suspending aid until an investigation into the incident is completed and revised screening procedures for Jordanian drivers are implemented. The shooter, identified as a Jordanian truck driver, was transporting aid to Gaza when the attack occurred. Israel launched a new wave of airstrikes on Thursday, targeting Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon, aiming to prevent the terror group from rebuilding in the area. The Israeli Defense Forces issued evacuation warnings for 4 sites, later expanding the order to 2 additional buildings. According to the IDF, the strikes were ordered in response to Hezbollah's attempts to resume its operations in the region. Thailand's King Maha Vajiralongkorn has officially endorsed Prime Minister Ontin Charnavrikul's new cabinet, according to a notice in the Royal Gazette. This endorsement clears the way for the cabinet to take an oath before the king, a necessary step before they can address Parliament. Following the oath, the ministers will be able to formally assume their duties. Canada and Mexico pledged to deepen their bilateral ties and strengthen their free trade pact and the United States during Prime Minister Mark Carney's visit to Mexico. At the press conference, Carney and President Claudia Sheinbaum emphasized expanding economic and security cooperation as well as their shared commitment to their partnership with the U.S. The United States vetoed a United Nations Security Council resolution demanding an immediate, unconditional ceasefire in Gaza. This is the 6th time when the United States has blocked the proposal. Well, the resolution, which received 14 votes in favor, called for the lifting of restrictions on humanitarian aid and the immediate release of all hostages held by Hamas. This comes as Israel advances ground offensive on Gaza and West Bank. Multiple reactions are coming from across the globe. President Trump, during his state visit to UK, noted that he had disagreements with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer on the Gaza issue as UK plans to move ahead with the recognition of Palestinian state. In fact, EU as well is considering to suspend trade concessions which are given to Israel. President Sanchez has stated that Spain supports the suspension of concessions, while the German Chancellor remarked that the decision regarding, in fact, the decision will be taken in a cabinet meeting next week. Let's listen into what the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, has to say.
Wir werden eine abschließende Meinung der Bundesregierung zu diesen Fragen, die jetzt auf der europäischen Ebene zu beantworten sind, in den nächsten Tagen miteinander finden. Wir werden ja in der nächsten Woche noch einmal eine vollständige Sitzungswoche des Deutschen Bundestages in Berlin haben. Wir sind dann auch alle in Berlin. Das heißt, wir werden in der nächsten Woche auch noch einmal auf der Ebene des Bundeskabinetts über diese Fragen miteinander sprechen. Und ich gehe davon aus, dass wir dann eine Position im informellen Rat am 1. Oktober in Kopenhagen haben werden, die von der ganzen Bundesregierung auch.
Meanwhile, French president has also made a statement on Israeli advancements, stating that Israeli actions are destroying its credibility across the globe. Take a listen to what French president had to say.
Having this type of operations in Gaza is totally counterproductive, because this is being, I have to say, a failure. The second point is that you are making so many civilians casualties and victims that you are completely destroying the image and the credibility of Israel, not just in the region, but in public opinions everywhere.
Well, joining us at this point in time is Dr. Emmanuel Navon, International Relations Lecturer at Tel Aviv University and Senior Fellow at Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, joining us from Tel Aviv. Thank you so much for your time on NewsX World. I'd like to understand from you, what do you make of this stance that the US has now chosen to take at the UNSC? How important is it from the Israeli point of view?
Look, I think the United States took an important moral stance at the Security Council. Because what was fundamentally flawed was the resolution, which, by the way, was submitted by Algeria. Algeria is a country that has very close ties with Iran, that is spreading trouble in North Africa, has a very tense relation with Morocco. Morocco is a strong ally of Israel. Algeria, of all countries, submitting such a resolution, which, as you said, as your report said, called for the liberation of the hostages. But what would liberate the hostages? Hamas doesn't want to free them. And the resolution calls for an unconditional end of the war, as you mentioned. Well, it should be conditional. And the condition should be that first Hamas should release the Israeli hostages and lay down its arms. And we in Israel very much regret that 14 members of the Security Council voted in favor of this resolution. Israel also wants an end of the war. But the end of the war has to be conditional. And as I said, the condition has to be the release of our hostages and Hamas laying down its arms.
Right, absolutely. I'd also like to understand from you, the Spanish president has supported the proposal of suspension of the trade concessions with Israel. Germany has also indicated that it will be deliberating on the matter very soon. In your assessment, what would happen if this proposal were to be acted on?
Well, first of all, it's not the Spanish president, it's the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez. Don't forget that this man is ridden with scandals. He is, he's holding to power despite the fact that he did not win the last election, just because he made an alliance with the far left, with communists, and with pro-independent movements. This man basically regretted, he said a couple of weeks ago, that he wished that Spain had a nuclear bomb to attack Israel. He encouraged hooligans to attack Israeli athletes who took place in the racing tour in Spain. This man is completely insane. He has an obsession with Israel. He's very radical. By the way, he was not even invited by President Trump to the White House last month, when President Trump has all his NATO allies around his table at the White House, because Sanchez is a radical. So we really don't care what Sanchez says. And by the way, Israel's military ties with Spain are really very minimal. Spain depends on Israel militarily more than the other way around. When it comes to Germany, on the other hand, Germany is a very close ally of Israel. We very much respect the Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, and we have a dialogue. With Germany, it's possible to have a dialogue. We have disagreements, but Chancellor Merz is a reasonable man with whom we sometimes have dialogues. This is not the case of Pedro Sánchez, who is a hypocrite, who hates Israel, and we have to make the difference between those two leaders.
All right. With that, I'd like to thank you for joining us on NewsX World, sharing your perspectives. We leave with that and shift our focus to some other news. Well, the United States, United Kingdom and France have blocked a joint Pakistan-China bid to list the Balochistan Liberation Army and its suicide wing, the Majid Brigade, as terrorist groups under the UN 1267 sanctions regime. The three countries cited insufficient evidence linking them to Al-Qaeda or in fact, Al-Qaeda. Now, meanwhile, Pakistan and China submitted the proposal to curb cross-border attacks from terror camps in Afghanistan. Pakistan's UN ambassador warned the Afghanistan Taliban must fulfill international counter-terrorism obligations. The BLA and Majid Brigade have targeted security forces and Chinese interests in Pakistan, and the US has previously listed them as foreign terrorist organizations. Earlier this year, Pakistani Army Chief Asim Munir met President Donald Trump in Washington to set up pressure on the Balochistan Liberation Army. In time is Major General G.G. Dwivedi, geostrategic defense expert, joining us from New Delhi, India. So thank you so much for your time speaking to us on NewsX World. What do you make of this decision that has been made by United States, United Kingdom, as well as France?
Well, I think first and foremost, this decision is in the right direction because there is insufficient evidence whether the Balochistan Liberation Army is linked to the other terrorist organization. But we have to also understand fundamentally as to what is the crux of the issue. First and foremost, Pakistan has been indulging in atrocity and human rights violation in Balochistan, which incidentally is the biggest province of Pakistan as far as area is concerned. It is also very rich in resources. But the Pakistan Army has been violating the human rights and also committing atrocities, and that's why the Balochistan Liberation Army was formed in 2000 to actually take on this excesses being committed by the Pakistan security forces. And they have been waging a kind of a resistance movement and also trying to get autonomy and independence for this region. But unfortunately, the Pakistan government and their military has not responded, and that's why they had to take up the arms. Of course, in recent times, there have been a number of instances in which the Balochistan Liberation Army has resisted Pakistan Army, but that is part of the ongoing struggle for greater autonomy and independence. So I think the decision taken by US, France, as to not list Balochistan Liberation Army as part of the 1267 UN list is in the right direction, because it will be very unfair for the people of Balochistan and also for their autonomy and sovereignty. So I think for time being, the decision is in the right direction, and we'll wait as to what is the further action. But my last word is that Balochistan Liberation Army is primarily carrying out struggle against the atrocities and human rights violation of Pakistan Army and the security forces. Over to you.
Right, absolutely. Sir, I request you to stay on with us as we reflect on some more news that we are tracking. Well, the Trump administration has announced it will revoke the sanctions waiver for the Chabahar port in Iran effective September 29, 2025. This waiver, originally granted in 2018, allowed India to develop the Shahid Beheshti terminal at Chabahar, a crucial project for India's access to Afghanistan and Central Asia. The withdrawal of the waiver is part of President Trump's maximum pressure campaign to isolate Iran. With this decision, India faces the risk of sanctions on its operations at the port, which could jeopardize its strategic and economic goals in the region. India has already invested significantly in Chabahar, a key alternative to Pakistan's Gwadar port and part of the international north-south transport corridor. Still with us on the broadcast is Major General G.G. Dwivedi. So I'd like to understand from you, what essentially do you make of these developments that we are tracking? The fact that Trump administration has announced that it will revoke the sanction waiver for the Chabahar port in Iran.
Well, this definitely will put India into a very difficult situation because India has pledged an investment of something like $8 billion to develop the Chabahar port. And as you rightly said, it has tremendous economic as well as strategic implications because it sits on the Gulf of Oman and it dominates the sea lanes of communication. And India had got the a waiver on this because in 2018 the waiver was given. But as American administration is contemplating to revoke that waiver, this will put India into a difficult situation because it will not only hurt our economic interest but also hurt the strategic interest as well. And second point is if you look at strategically, Chabahar port actually is counterbalances the Gwadar port, which is being developed by the Chinese and also China-Pakistan economic corridor. So I think that India will have to talk it over to the American administration to continue with the exception that sanction should not be imposed because this will hurt our interest. But primarily why America is trying to do that is to put maximum pressure on Iran, and that's why Chabahar port is also under the scanner, but I think India will have to take it diplomatically to ensure that Chabahar port doesn't come under the sanction while American administration is trying to pressurize Iranian government. Over to you.
Right, absolutely. With that, I'd like to thank you for joining us on NewsX World, sharing your perspectives with us. We leave that and shift our focus to some other developments that are taking place. Well, Venezuela has launched 3 days of military exercises on its Caribbean islands of La Orchila as tensions escalate with the United States. President Nicolas Maduro ordered the drills named Sovereign Caribbean, involving warships, armed drones, surveillance systems and electronic warfare operations. The move follows U.S. naval operations in the region, including strikes that destroyed 2 Venezuelan boats and left 14 suspected drug traffickers dead. Actions criticized by UN experts as extrajudicial executions. Venezuelan state media showed vessels and aircrafts deployed near La Orquila, close to where the U.S. recently intercepted a Venezuelan fishing boat. Maduro, whose presidency is not recognized by Washington, vowed to defend the country against what he called U.S. aggression. This is what the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, has to say.
El próximo sábado, 20 de septiembre, los cuarteles van al pueblo, los militares van al pueblo, van a visitar los 5.336 circuitos comunales. La Fuerza Armada Nacional Bolivariana va al pueblo, va a las comunidades.
Ross Feingold, political analyst, joins us at this point in time. Thank you so much for your time on NewsX World. I'd like to understand from you, what do you make of these military exercises that Venezuela has launched?
It's for domestic consumption. President Maduro has to show people and his supporters specifically, keeping in mind he's not universally supported in Venezuela. He's got to steal elections to maintain power, but he's got to show his supporters that he's doing something in response to the recent American military actions. Of course, the key thing here is that whatever exercises he does, doesn't matter how big they are, how many personnel or ships or aircraft are involved, it is not going to change the current policy of the Trump administration. The Trump administration, President Trump specifically, have decided on this course of action, and this kind of show by Venezuela, which again is for domestic consumption in Venezuela, it will not change the Trump administration's decision-making.
Right, absolutely. And the developments that have been taking place, the fact that in the region there were strikes that destroyed 2 Venezuelan boats, left 14 suspected drug traffickers dead. The actions are being criticized by the UN experts as extrajudicial executions. What do you make of those statements?
That will probably cause a debate about international law. You know, people often think that international law with regard to very complex questions like this is something that's settled. But there's always going to be experts, scholars, lawyers who are going to argue the other side and say, in this case specifically, that the United States was fully justified. If necessary, I would expect the State Department or the Department of War to put forward its own experts who are going to say that the United States was completely justified in doing this. So similar to President Maduro ordering military exercises, UN experts voicing these views about the U.S. action, it is not going to change the Trump administration's policy. I think we should expect this deployment to continue for a number of months to come, and probably there will be similar incidents that are going to occur in the near future.
Right, absolutely. I request you to stay on with us as we reflect on some more news coming right now. Well, Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is set to depart for the United States with a potential first meeting with US President Donald Trump. Albanese is traveling to the US to attend the United Nations General Assembly in New York and is scheduled to join a reception hosted by President Trump, although a bilateral meeting has not been officially confirmed. Australia looks for support from Trump on the nuclear-powered submarine deal under AUKUS, a collaboration between the US, Australia and the UK. Australia will also push for adherence to its free trade agreement with the US, while an $8 billion investment in a Western Australia shipyard has already been made. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Ross Feingold. So thank you so much for being patient with us. And I'd like to understand from you what exactly, in fact, how do you foresee this meeting between Donald Trump and, in fact, Anthony Albanese panning out? What will be the key highlights in your assessment?
As you indicated, AUKUS is going to be a crucial part of a meeting between the Australian Prime Minister and the United States President. It's such a large and important, from a security perspective, project. It also involves a third country, the United Kingdom. Not only are the amounts of money involved very large, but also the timeline is literally decades. And as has been widely reported, the United States is conducting an internal review of this program. Australia has consistently and publicly said that they are committed to the AUKUS program, and they're waiting for a decision from the United States. And it's very possible that the Trump administration will say, we're committed to this program, but you have to pay more. And that's something that Australia is going to have to confront at the time, if in fact that is the decision of the Trump administration. They have other issues on the bilateral agenda. You mentioned trade and the implementation or possible changes to the free trade agreement. And of course, AUKUS is also part of a joint strategy to deal with China as well. And then there's also the Quad, and whether or not President Trump is going to show the same level of interest in the Quad as President Biden did over the previous few years. That's also an open question at the moment.
Right, absolutely. Of course, we were also, in fact, addressing the fact that Australia will also push for adherence to its free trade agreement with the US, while an $8 billion investment in a Western Australia shipyard has already been made. With regards to, the trade agreement, what exactly do you foresee on that front?
I think like any trade partner, including those that have free trade agreements with the United States already, we think about examples such as Mexico and Canada or South Korea, President Trump has clearly shown a willingness to say, well, I don't like parts of our free trade agreement. I'd like to reopen that. And that's something that Australia just needs to be prepared for. I would say it's inevitable that the United States is going to make additional requests on Australia, and Australia is going to find it very difficult to refuse. This is an important relationship for the United States. I think President Trump knows that. But again, as we've seen with many allies, President Trump is willing to say there's things I don't like in our relationship. And often that is either in defense